Okay, hello everyone who happens to get a chance to watch this. My name is Jeff Pence. I'm co-director of the BorderLight International Festival Theater and Fringe Festival based in Cleveland, Ohio. And today we have the wonderful opportunity to speak with a representative of Theater of War, the company manager and sometime producer and performer, Marjolaine Goldsmith, who is going to share with us a really fascinating project that is especially relevant today, although it comes from the far past. So we're going to talk about that project, about Theater of War. But first of all, hello, Marjolaine.
Hi. I'm good. How are you doing?
Great. So why don't you, before we get too far, while people are still here, let's give a notice to the special event that's coming up, so that people can calendar that, and then we'll go back. Then we'll
yeah. We're premiering our newest project. It's called the Oedipus Project on May 7th at 7 p.m. It's our first online event. Most of our events happen in live settings, so this is really an exciting moment for us as a company. We have 25 different projects that each address a separate public health or social justice issue through the same format, which is a reading of a live play as a catalyst for really powerful discussions about a whole host of public health and social justice issues.
Great. And that's March 7th, and
it's May 7th.
I'm sorry, May 7th. Right. Okay.
But time's a construct.
The time has been deconstructed. It's May 7th, and Theater of War is extremely well known in the performing arts community and social justice communities, but that's still, those are not the biggest communities in the world. So just so people know a couple other things about the organization. The performers you will recognize, as they are often quite famous, and the discussions are very interestingly managed to be relevant to you, whether you're a well-versed in theater or not. So Marjolaine, can you tell us a little bit about, I thought it's interesting, tell us a little bit about the organization, which also relates to this project, are really rooted in a deep interest in the origins of theater, and especially in classical theater, and why you think that's relevant for people today.
Totally. I think so much of my work with Theater of War Productions is building the kind of structures, or putting those structures in place to create the conditions for a conversation that wouldn't have happened had we not performed the play. And I think those ancient roots of theater, that it was developed in the 5th century for the health of the polis. It came to fruition as like ancient technology at the rise of, voting and democracy and the Hippocratic Oath and medicine. So it's actually like we fully see these plays as public health missions, that they're like a written manifestation of all of the ethical decision-making of what it meant to participate in a democracy. And so these would be huge audiences, like 17,000 citizen soldiers who were all fully aware of what it meant to go to war. They were dealing with plagues, and that's why this project, the Oedipus Project, is so kind of like of course, this is a necessary thing that was dealt with in the ancient world and now in the modern world. So these plays are all the more relevant now.
Oh, that's really interesting. Our own festival is very interested in, I guess, what you would call the body politic, and about the healthiness of sort of movement across certain boundaries and borders.
Totally.
How do you think of the relationship of that body politic and a kind of the experience of theater for performers and for audiences, and how that might relate to not just the aesthetic experience, but also to the rest of their lives?
Well, I think the buzzword for me is audience. For our company, the audience is everything. We always ask the central question of for whom are we performing these plays? And we kind of rely on the audience to be the translator of the plays, and we don't fix meaning to the plays. They're up for interpretation, and that's why the discussion is really the main meat of the event. I mean, we have all these incredible actors from, as you said, really well-known actors. They're really the best in the business, and they're kind of like the opening act for the discussion. And that's what's like been incredible is I was a classics major. I had the fortune of studying with you, Jeff. And like, I was kind of acutely aware when I was in college that I just wasn't fully understanding what it meant to be like a veteran who had seen tours and tours of duty or like dealt with all the mythological proportions of great tragedy, like homelessness and domestic violence and incest and all of the things that really make us human. And it wasn't until I heard these plays read in the set and setting of where we perform mostly, which is on military bases, in homeless shelters, in addiction clinics, in prisons, jails. I've spent a lot of time on Rikers Island recently. And as a company, we've served as kind of public artists in residence. So it's definitely the public audience that we're serving mostly, but a lot of times it's closed and private. But it really wasn't until I heard, Ajax interpreted by a military spouse that I even began to understand what the plays were about. And I think that's what the point is of theater, is like, how do we reconcile what it means to be human on like a public scale, on an open scale? How do we destigmatize these issues? And I think that's what these plays were doing. And that's all societies did this. I think it's the biological need for storytelling that is just put on really publicly.
Well, that's really fascinating. But first, let's clarify the record. I had the good fortune of teaching you, not the other way around. And not classics, by the way, which is why this is fresh for me to talk with you about. So if I love this idea of the opening act being the performers, and the audience being the center. It inverts a lot of things we think about celebrity culture and things like that.
Yeah, but that's all on purpose. That's definitely, I'm glad you raised that, because that's like a lot of our work. The actors are never to be seen after they perform. They're never to be heard from again. It's not really I think the theatrical world uses this term talk back that I'm kind of allergic to because it's not about process. I think we're using these plays to actually address what they're about.
So you bring in, was that okay?
I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No. It's Flashback Sunday. So I love this idea, this questioning of talkbacks, because often, if artists left to their own devices will talk about art making forever and a day, and the issues in the plays you all present are deeper than that. So you bring in actually other people to manage discussions. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't raise that. Thanks for teeing that up. All of our performances are immediately, the actors leave the stage or the Zoom, and then 4 panelists, and it's always 4, and they're all panelists by virtue of their experience, not by their title or their degrees. They're not on book tour. They're authorities on the play by virtue of their experience. So they're asked not to prepare, to just give their gut responses to what they heard and saw in the play that touched them, that reached them across time, and kind of model for the audience a radical candor, to take the risk of maybe not knowing what you're going to say, and using the play as a point of departure for their remarks. So there's a lot of examples. For this project, we're really engaging with Jumaane Williams's office. He's the public advocate for New York City, to develop our panel. And it'll probably be people working on the front lines with this issue with COVID, but of course this has reached everybody globally. So this will be kind of our first New York focused one, but there's people who are RSVPing all over the world. So that's really exciting for us and the projects are all iterative like that. We always travel. There's something nomadic to what we do, and it's about reaching as many communities that are affected by the issue portrayed in the play. But the panelists kick it off, and then we swing it wide for the audience. And also in the panel is a real diversity of opinion. So they'll probably be, you know, maybe someone who's been touched by the carceral system, so someone who's maybe formerly incarcerated with this issue, because that's been definitely at the forefront of our brains with how COVID has touched so many people, but also people in the medical field. New mothers is something I've been thinking a lot about, and that's definitely in the play. I mean, I get to play this guy, the priest, and he says all this really graphic stuff about mothers dying in labor and giving birth to shriveled little corpses. And that was definitely present in ancient Greece. And I can imagine the pressure of giving birth today, and in the context of a hospital, maybe not being allowed to have your spouse in the room. All of those things are all pressing. So we're trying to be as mindful, without interpreting the play, but as mindful of those who have been affected, to foreground their perspective for the audience. And also this panel is always very gender diverse, very race diverse, age diverse. All of those elements are definitely thought of as we compose the panel, so that it's balanced, so that we're kind of democratizing the space as a gesture.
Well, that goes back to something you said earlier, which is the you know, the ancient connection. There's so many things were birthed at the same time, but democracy, theater, I would say, you know, a certain complexity of human psychology, like interiority, just all sorts of things happen at once. But this is actually a format question about this particular presentation of the Oedipus Project, which is when you spoke about the discussions, you spoke about, you know, not talkback leaders, but panelists who are having gut reactions to what they had just seen, and it gets back to this very ancient idea of what makes theater special, what makes theater different than what we're doing right now. Yeah. For instance, which is immediacy, the presence, that the ancient sharing of breath, right? The performer breathes out, the audience breathes in, and this will be very, very different, both from rehearsal process to presentation, to do as a Zoom. It's like Oedipus, Zoom Oedipus. So tell me just your gut reaction to what it's like to try to have that immediacy and those goals and all that you care about in the theater of war.
Thank you so much for asking that, because I mean, this has been so much of my thinking, because the walls of the room are really obvious in a Zoom, or like, and so much of our work is passing the mic and reversing any hierarchy, but there's already a hierarchy if in a webinar setting, certain people are visible and certain people are invisible, and we have to grant them the possibility of speaking, but we're trying to make it as analogous to how we normally function, which is just, I literally am out there as a mic runner with whoever's facilitating. In this case, it'll be our artistic director, Brian Dories, who's just, he translated the play, he directs, and this is his brainchild, he's the founder. And he devised this form, definitely through his own experience with death, and he experienced a lot of loss as a very young person. I read his book, full disclosure, and wrote him a letter, and he hired me. And that was my first real job out of college. And that was 4 years ago. So this is our first chapter. The company has been around 12 years. So I've just been here for the last 4. And I'm really conscious of those shifts. So we'll be utilizing like the raise your hand mechanism in webinar, but we're making the conscious decision to like disable chat and disable Q&A and really foreground whoever's speaking. And I think the count of how many people are bearing, you know, the views or whoever, is really influential in how you perceive theater, because you're in a collective. And I think that's definitely true in a movie theater too. I think that's why movie theaters hopefully will survive this. And, but I'm very cognizant of that. But I hope that I mean, I've actually been thinking a lot about the class you taught, Jeff, about hopeful monsters, because I feel like we're at this moment where there's so much technology and so many different iterations of and mechanisms to view stuff. there's such a variety of like media to experience, but I'm totally thinking about that. Like, how do we create the form? What gets lost? What gets gained? And how are these overlapping? And it feels kind of forced sometimes, but I think what I've experienced in the few Zoom interviews that I've heard is if anything said that moves you, it moves the space you're in. So it's clearly manifesting in how people are seeing whatever is being talked about. So I'm hopeful that that maintains, that carries over.
Well, let's always be hopeful. The thing's monstrous. This is just this freestyling response to what you said. That one of the things that being in an audience has, in a positive way, and sometimes maybe in a controlling way, but it has the awareness of others, which can be normalizing, but can also be shaming, in a sense that a heckler that is only by him or herself is usually quickly drowned out by a crowd who's not interested in heckling. And Zoom, as a hopeful monster, was never intended for this sort of thing. And so I just hope that people don't abuse the anonymity, which is so different than being in a visible audience where you have to sort of.
Well, I think it comes down to like the derivation of amphitheater, which is like amphitheatron, like I see you, you see me. And in this case, you might not see everybody, but, and I think that totally you hit the nail on the head. That's what has come out so obviously about kind of the toxicity of being anonymous and saying whatever you want. But from my 4-year experience doing this in all sorts of settings, I have a tremendous trust in the audience, and I have a tremendous sureness that the audience will correct. And like usually the most repugnant thing that's said in a discussion is the most productive, because again, we're like creating this brave space where people have the courage to say genuinely how they feel, and where people can bear witness to truth. So it actually, we call it like the antidote to Twitter. Like what happens when we actually have real discourse about really divisive issues like police community relations. We premiered a project called Antigone and Ferguson that had a run in New York City and Brooklyn. And we toured all over, in Baltimore, all over the Northeast, and Greece. We brought it to Greece. And these are really divisive issues that have affected our country for as long as its existence. And we premiered it in Ferguson on the stage where Michael Brown graduated. And we set the choruses of Antigone to music, and they were sung by a choir composed of police activists and 3 of Michael Brown's teachers and members of the faith community, people who normally wouldn't be singing together. So we couldn't preach to the choir. And it was in 2016 that we premiered the project. So it was kind of a year out from Michael died in 2014. He was murdered. And it created so much cohesion and camaraderie and healing. And it was just a total privilege to bear witness to all that and feel the audience share in what was happening, and all the repugnant things that were said or all the things that were shocking were able to be held without it dissolving into, fistfights or Twitter wars or trolling or anything that totally categorizes debate today.
Well, that's fascinating. Our own project here with this festival began as a kind of quiet response to what we thought of as a subtle crisis of the hardening of various kinds of boundaries and borders, obviously between nations, but between many more things than that, between performance styles, between various identities, and and our work has been about promoting that kind of exploration and transgression across those borders. Mm-hmm. But I want to go back to just to round out why this play now, because clearly Brian and the company and all the participants, because I think you're getting a lot of people who donate things, who donate time, effort, and energy to your projects. There's a recognition that there's something about Oedipus which is really relevant to what I would not just call the COVID crisis, but the great big messy stack of crises of which Corona is either at the bottom or the top.
Totally.
So what's it about this play that relates to contemporary viewers and individuals?
Well, at the center of the play, it's a crime against nature, really. Oedipus murders his father and conceives 2 kids with his mom, or at least 2 kids, definitely Antigone and Jumaane. But we were actually...
It's enough kids to be with your mother.
Yeah. But he is a leader who doesn't listen to prophecy and thinks anyone who's countering him is just stealing his power. And I think that relates to every era, unfortunately. So it's really about betrayal, intergenerational curses, and denial, and the human capacity for denial, and in the face of calamity. So plague, but the crops are ravaged. And full disclosure, our ideational period of this project, a lot of my work for 2020 prior to COVID was developing this project as our climate change project. So how did we approach climate change? Because again, at the center of the play, which has been so beautifully articulated by people like Greta Thunberg, is a betrayal to future generations. So the Greeks might not have approached climate change so directly, so head on, but they definitely understood that betrayal is the wound that cuts the deepest. And they definitely wrap their heads around intergenerational curses and being at the mercy of the gods and waking us up to the slim possibility of avoiding ruining generations to come. And again, all these plays are metaphors. So I'm sure, we haven't done this yet, so I'm sure the audience is gonna pull whatever is relevant. So it's really not my job to assign meaning to a play. It's really waiting for, we're picking this play because I think there's so much to be interpreted. And there's so many characters at hand. There's Oedipus's family, there's the chorus of people who seek his help to avoid this tragedy or to like fix it. And Oedipus has fixed stuff in the past. So that's why, he dealt with the Sphinx famously, and alleviated great suffering from Thebes, but like they're asking him to do that again.
Well, just in the event that if I raise my hand during the conversation after the performance, in case my hand doesn't get called upon, I'd also just throw one other thing out there, which is that in the midst of inexplicable misery and suffering, the play delivers a weird kind of miracle, which is that it turns out things are meaningful. You just didn't understand how they all fit together.
Totally.
And that's a very hopeful thing to have in your back pocket at times like this.
Yeah, and I think something that was so fascinating to me when I was in school, I remember being taught by like TVN. I think I studied Oedipus with Thomas Van Norwick, who was amazing. Is an amazing classics professor. But this whole thing that's set up of blindness and sight, and I think we're living through those moments of coming to consciousness and being blind to certain things and things becoming visible. And I think that manifests in the play, but Oedipus then like gouges out his eyes. He blinds himself. That's how it ends. It's been around a while, no spoilers, but but I think that everyone can kind of relate to that. To not seeing something for what it was until you had to come to grips with it. Well,
on that ambiguously hopeful note, remind us again how people can see the next theater.
So it's on Zoom. You can RSVP on Eventbrite. I'm sure the link will be somewhere near wherever this lives. But it's on May 7th. It's called the Oedipus Project at 7 p.m.
7 p.m. Eastern time.
Yes.
Don't be Eastern time centric. The whole world is out there. Marjolaine Goldsmith from Theater of War Project, on behalf of my colleagues at BorderLight International Festival of Theater and the Fringe Festival, Thanks for your time. Thanks for your
Oh, this
insights.
has been
Thanks
so
for your
fun.
work.
Yeah, nice to talk to you, Jeff.
Okay, great, Marjolaine. Ciao. Bye.
Bye.